On Sunday, May 9th, I found Colonel Valency, the celebrated antiquarian and engineer of Ireland, with Johnson. On Monday the 10th, I dined with Johnson at Mr. Paradise, where was a large company. Mr. Bryant, Mr. Jodrell, Mr. Hawkins Brown, etc. On Thursday the 13th, I dined with Johnson at Mr. Jodrell's with another large company. The Bishop of Exeter, Lord Monboddo, Mr. Murphy, etc. I was sorry to observe Lord Monboddo avoid any communication with Dr. Johnson. I flattered myself that I had made them very good friends. See Journal of the Tour of the Hebrides, 3rd edition, page 67. But unhappily, his lordship had resumed and cherished a violent prejudice against my illustrious friend, to whom I must do the justice to say there was on his part not the least anger, but a good-humored sportiveness. Nay, though he knew of his lordship's indisposition towards him, he was even kindly, as appeared from his inquiring on me after him by an abbreviation of his name. Well, how does Monty? Maybe I should start calling him Lord Monty instead of Lord Monboddo, because that name always tricks me up. On Saturday, May 15th, I dined with Johnson at Dr. Brocklesby's, where were Colonel Valency, again, Mr. Murphy, and that ever-cheerful companion, Mr. Davies, apothecary to His Majesty. Of these days and others on which I saw him, I have no memorials, except the general recollection of his being able and animated in conversation, and appearing to relish society as much as the youngest man. I find only these 3 small particulars. 1, when a person was mentioned who said, I have lived 51 years in this world without having had 10 minutes of uneasiness, Johnson exclaimed, the man who says so lies. He attempts to impose on human credulity. The Bishop of Exeter in vain observed that men were very different. His lordship's manner was not impressive, and I learned afterwards that Johnson did not find out that the person who talked to him was a prelate. If he had, I doubt not that he would have treated him with more respect. For one, talking of George Salmanazar, whom he reverenced for his piety, he said, I should as soon think of contradicting a bishop. One of the company, Boswell, provoked him greatly by doing what he could least of all bear, which was quoting something of his own writing against what he then maintained. What, sir, cried the gentleman, Boswell, do you say to? The busy day, the peaceful night, unfelt, uncounted, glided by. Which is Verses on the Death of Mr. Levitt. That's from. Johnson, finding himself thus presented as giving an instance of a man who had lived without uneasiness, was much offended, for he looked upon such quotation as unfair. His anger burst out in an unjustifiable retort, insinuating that the gentleman's remark was a sally of ebriety. Quote, Sir, there is one passion I would advise you to command. When you have drunk out of that glass, don't drink another. Here was exemplified what Goldsmith said of him, with the aid of a very witty image from one of Kibber's comedies. Quote, There is no arguing with Johnson, for if his pistol misses fire, he knocks you down with the butt end of it. I think I remember that quote from before. Another was this. When a gentleman of eminence, George Stevens, in the literary world was violently censured for attacking people by anonymous paragraphs in newspapers, Johnson, for the spirit of contradiction, as I thought, took up his defense and said, Come, this is not so terrible a crime. He means only to vex them a little. I do not say that I should do it, but there is a great difference between him and me. What is fit for Hephaestion is not fit for Alexander. Another, when I told him that a young and handsome countess had said to me, I should think that to be praised by Dr. Johnson would make one a fool all one's life, and that I answered, Madame, I shall make him a fool today by repeating this to him. Johnson said, I am too old to be made a fool, but if you say I am made a fool, I shall not deny it. I am much pleased with a compliment, especially from a pretty woman. On the evening of Saturday, May 15th, he was in fine spirits at our Essex Head Club. He told us, I dined yesterday at Mrs. Garrick's with Mrs. Carter, Miss Hannah Moore, and Miss Fanny Burney. 3 such women are not to be found. I know not where I could find a 4th except Mrs. Lennox, who is superior to them all. I said, What? Had you them all to yourself, sir? Johnson said, I had them all as much as they were had, but it might have been better had there been more company there. I answered, Might not Mrs. Montague have been a 4th? Johnson said, Sir, Mrs. Montague does not make a trade of her wit, but Mrs. Montague is a very extraordinary woman. She has a constant stream of conversation, and it is always impregnated. It has always meaning. I said, Mr. Burke has a constant stream of conversation. Mr. Burke has a constant stream of conversation. Johnson said, Yes, sir, if a man were to go by chance at the same time with Burke under a shed to shun the shower, he would say, This is an extraordinary man. If Burke should go into a stable to see his horse dressed, the ostler would say, We have had an extraordinary man here. I said, Foote was a man who never failed in conversation if he had gone into a stable. Johnson cut me off and said, I'm throwing that in there, but that's implied. Sir, if he had gone into a stable, the ostler would have said, Here has been a comical fellow, but not have respected him. I said, And sir, the ostler would have answered him, would have given him as good as he brought, as the common saying is. Johnson said, Yes, sir, and Foote would have answered the ostler. When Burke does not descend to be merry, his conversation is very superior indeed. There is no proportion between the powers which he shows in serious talk and in jocularity. When he lets himself down to that, he is the kennel. He is in the kennel. I have in another place, the Journal of the Tour of the Hebrides, 3rd edition, page 20, on sale now. Opposed, and I hope with success, Dr. Johnson's very singular and erroneous notion as to Mr. Burke's pleasantry. Mr. Wyndham now said low to me that he differed from our great friend in this observation, for that Mr. Burke was often very happy in his merriment. It would not have been right for either of us to have contradicted Johnson at this time, in a society all of whom did not know and value Mr. Burke as much as we did. Might have occasioned something more rough, and at any rate would probably have checked the flow of Johnson's good humor. He called to us with a sudden air of exultation as the thought started in his mind, Oh, gentlemen, I must tell you a very great thing. The Empress of Russia has ordered the Rambler to be translated into the Russian language. So I shall be read on the banks of the Volga. Horace boasts that his fame would extend as far as the banks of the Rhone. Now the Volga is farther from me than the Rhone was from Horace. Boswell's footnote here. I have since heard that the report was not well founded, but the elation discovered by Johnson and the belief that it was true showed a noble ardor for literary fame. Probably since then it's been, I'm guessing it's been translated into Russian. I don't know, I'll have to look that up. Anyway, Boswell said at this point, You must certainly be pleased with this, sir. Johnson said, I am pleased, sir, to be sure. A man is pleased to find he has succeeded in that which he has endeavored to do. One of the company mentioned his having seen a noble person driving in his carriage and looking exceedingly well, notwithstanding his great age. Johnson said, Ah, sir, that is nothing. Bacon observes that a stout, healthy old man is like a tower undermined. On Sunday, May 16th, I found Johnson alone. He talked of Mrs. Thrale with much concern, saying, Sir, she has done everything wrong since Thrale's bridle was off her neck. and was proceeding to mention some circumstances which had since been the subject of public discussion when he was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Douglas, now Bishop of Salisbury. Dr. Douglas, upon the occasion, refuted a mistaken notion which is very common in Scotland, that the ecclesiastical discipline of the Church of England, though duly enforced, is insufficient to preserve the morals of the clergy, inasmuch as all delinquents may be screened by appealing to the convocation, which being never authorized by the king to sit for the dispatch of business, the appeal never can be heard. Dr. Douglas observed that this was founded upon ignorance, for that the bishops have sufficient power to maintain discipline, and that the sitting of the convocation was wholly immaterial in this respect, it being not a court of judicature, but like a parliament, to make canons and regulations as times may require. Wow, gotta give me credit for making that sound exciting just by changing the tone of my voice. Johnson, talking of the fear of death, said, "Some people are not afraid because they look upon salvation as the effect of an absolute decree and think they feel in themselves the marks of sanctification. Others, and those that the most rational in my opinion, look upon salvation as conditional, and as they never can be sure that they have complied with the conditions, they are afraid." In one of his little manuscript diaries about this time, I find a short notice which marks his amiable disposition more certainly than 1,000 studied declarations. And I quote, "Afternoon spent cheerfully and elegantly, I hope without offense to God or man. Though in no holy duty, yet in the general exercise and cultivation of benevolence." On Monday, May 17th, I dined with Johnson at Mr. Dilly's, where was Colonel Valency, the Reverend Dr. Gibbons, and Mr. Capel Loft, who, though a most zealous Whig, has a mind so full of learning and knowledge, and so much exercised in various departments, and withal so much liberality, that the stupendous powers of the literary Goliath, though they did not frighten this little David of popular spirit, could not but excite his admiration. There was also Mr. Brainwaith of the post office, that amiable and friendly man who, with modest and unassuming manners, has associated with many of the wits of the age. Johnson was very quiescent today. Perhaps, too, I was indolent. I find nothing more of him in my notes, but that when I mentioned that I had seen in the King's Library 63 editions of my favorite Thomas à Kempis, amongst which was in eight languages, Latin, German, French, Italian, Spanish, English, Arabic, and Armenian, Johnson said he thought it unnecessary to collect many editions of a book, which were all the same except as to the paper and print. He would have the original and all the translations and all the editions which have had any variation in the text. Yeah, okay. Some pronoun confusion there, I think, but I'm not going to dwell on it right now. Johnson approved of the famous collection of editions of Horace by Douglas, mentioned by Pope, who is said to have had a close closet filled with them. And he added, "Every man should try to collect one book in that manner and present it to a public library." On Tuesday, May 18th, I saw Johnson for a short time in the morning. I told him that the mob had called out, as the king passed, "No Fox! No Fox!" which I did not like. Johnson said, "They were right, sir." I said I thought not, for it seemed to be making Mr. Fox the king's competitor. There being no audience, so that there could be no triumph in a victory, he fairly agreed with me. I said it might do very well if explained thus: "Let us have no Fox," understanding it is a prayer to His Majesty not to appoint the gentleman minister. On Wednesday, May 19th, I sat as part of the evening with Johnson by ourselves. I observed that the death of our friends might be a consolation against the fear of our own dissolution, because we might have more friends in the other world than in this. He perhaps felt this as a reflection upon his apprehension as to death, and said with heat, "How can a man know where his departed friends are, or whether they will be his friends in the other world? How many friendships have you known formed upon principles of virtue? Most friendships are formed by caprice or by chance, mere confederacies in vice or leagues in folly." "We talked of our worthy friend Mr. Langton," Johnson said. "I know not who will go to heaven if Langton does not. Sir, if I could always say, sit anima mea cum Langtano, may my soul be with Langton." Oh, that's it. Oh, I'm sorry. It's not sir if I could say. It's sir I could almost say, sit anima mea cum Langtano. May my soul be with Langton. I mentioned a very eminent friend, Hill, suggests Burke, as a virtuous man, and Johnson said, "Yes, sir, but Burke has not the evangelical virtue of Langton. Burke, I am afraid, would not scruple to pick up a wench." He, however, charged Mr. Langton with what he thought want of judgment upon an interesting occasion. "When I was ill," said Johnson, "I desired he would tell me sincerely in what he thought my life was faulty. Sir, he brought me a sheet of paper on which he had written down several texts of Scripture recommending Christian charity. And when I questioned him what occasion I had given for such an animadversion, all that he could say amounted to this, that I sometimes contradicted people in conversation. Now, what harm does it do to any man to be contradicted?" I answered, "I suppose he meant the manner of doing it, roughly and harshly." Johnson said, "And who is the worse for this?" And I said, "It hurts people of weak nerves." Johnson answered, "I know not no such weak-nerved people." Mr. Burke, to whom I related this conference, said, "It is well if, when a man comes to die, he has nothing heavier upon his conscience than having been a little rough in conversation." Johnson, at the time when the paper was presented to him, though at first pleased with the attention of his friend, whom he thanked in an earnest manner, soon exclaimed in a loud and angry tone, "What is your drift, sir?" Sir Joshua Reynolds pleasantly observed that it was a scene for comedy to see a penitent get into a violent passion and belabor his confessor. After all, I cannot but be of opinion that as Mr. Langton was seriously requested by Dr. Johnson to mention what appeared to him erroneous in the character of his friend, he was bound as an honest man to intimate what he really thought, which he certainly did in the most delicate manner, so that Johnson himself, when in a quiet frame of mind, was pleased with it. The texts suggested are not before me, and I shall quote a few of them. Are now before me, and I shall quote a few of them. "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." Matthew, verse 5. "I, therefore, the prisoner of the Lord, beseech you that ye walk worthy of the vocation wherewith ye are called, with all lowliness and meekness, with long-suffering, forbearing one another in love." Festus, I think, volume 4 or 5, line 1 and 2. Verse 4 or 5. "And above all these things, put on charity, which is the bond of perfectness." From Col, I don't know what that is. I don't know. Col 3, verse 3, line 14, I guess. "Charity suffereth long and is kind. Charity envieth not. Charity vaunteth not itself, is not pulled up, does not behave itself unseemly, is not easily provoked," which is 1 first the letters to the Corinthians, I believe, verse 13, line 4 and 5. Oh, okay, that's enough for today. Till next time, bye from Boswell.